The Michael Jackson movie isn't telling us the full truth. Fans were excited to see the full story of the King of Pop on the big screen, but what they got instead was a massive puff piece that completely rewrites history. The movie not only underplayed the reality of his childhood trauma, but it completely erased the most significant controversies of his life by cutting the story off in 1988. But why? Was it just to keep the movie positive, or were greedy labels rewriting history to protect a billion-dollar brand? Today, I'm showing you exactly how the Michael Jackson movie tried to rewrite history. We all know Michael Jackson is the biggest artist to ever live. We also know that he has had one of the most controversial careers, from a troubled childhood to massive controversies in his adult life. While he was the King of Pop, he was also a troubled individual who gave his soul to the art. But this movie completely erased half his story. Instead of telling the full story, they created the perfect fairy tale that would forever immortalize Michael Jackson in a positive light. They are not preserving his, but because they own his likeness and want to make sure it remains profitable. So what exactly does this movie show us? The film kicks off in Gary, Indiana, and walks us right into the rise of the Jackson 5. We get the early days of Michael performing, and the studio hits all the big musical milestones. The director packs the screen with studio sessions and exact concert recreations to keep the fans entertained. But when it comes to the dark side of his childhood, they kept things extremely safe. We see Joe Jackson being strict, but the movie frames his actions as just tough parenting to build discipline. The script then shifts to paint Michael as a pure musical genius, dealing with the stress of fame. And then the most calculated part happens. Right after the bad tour in 1988, the media has been pushing the story that his family stepped in and purposely blocked the later years to protect his image. They absolutely played a role, but that is only a part of the truth. The major record labels and corporate backers were the true hand behind this movie. The entire movie was made as a rebrand. In today's world, artists are heavily affected by their biggest controversies. The label needed to rewrite his history into a positive story. You have to understand how incredibly influential Hollywood biopics actually are. Millions of people go to theaters and watch these movies and accept them as a definitive historical truth. They know this film will permanently shape the public perception of Michael Jackson for an entirely new generation. The underlying motivation here is purely financial. The corporate goal is simply to continue milking his name for every possible dollar well into the future. They are securing a long-term revenue stream by ensuring the Michael Jackson brand remains spotless and entirely commercial. But the absolute dark irony in this movie was Michael Jackson's relationship with the music industry during the last decade of his life. Michael Jackson actively fought his record label. He staged massive public boycotts against them. He held press conferences to expose their business practices and called out the executives by name. His ultimate leverage against the industry was his ownership of ATV Publishing Catalog, which held the rights to some of the most valuable music in history. The label desperately wanted total control of those publishing rights, but Michael completely refused to sell his ownership. He held his ground against the corporate machine and fought them tooth and nail until the day he died. Then look at what happened after he passed away. His family and the estate immediately turned around and sold those exact catalog rights back to the industry for billions of dollars. The very institutions that he went to war with were handed total control over his legacy and this movie. This is why they didn't tell the full story. They purposely skipped the biggest years of his career just to avoid putting the story on screen. This is how they shape the narrative. If they can control the story, they can rewrite themselves out of it. Michael would have never approved of this movie. He went completely against what the label stood for. He didn't want to be completely exploited by them, and this is exactly what they're doing with this movie. The record label was without a doubt his biggest enemy while he was alive. Today, those same corporate entities are the ones funding and writing his official story. They took a man who actively rebelled against their control and packaged his life into a safe, easily digestible commercial product. They scrubbed the controversies and completely erased his war against the industry. You cannot sell a billion-dollar family-friendly brand if your main character is facing those kind of charges. What most people don't know is that the original drafts of the script actually included the events of the 90s. The studio was actually forced into massive reshoots that cost tens of millions of dollars just to scrub those scenes away. They had to remove that entire era because of strict confidential settlements that legally limit how the estate can portray those specific events. The estate used their legal and financial power to make sure those scenes were never shown. They also heavily restricted anyone involved in the production from speaking out. They kept the set locked down so the real story could never surface. They also brought in a production team who were entirely willing to play ball with the estate. This production was completely controlled by a corporate boardroom executing a calculated PR strategy. They are betting that the general public would just consume the music and accept this manufactured reality without asking any questions. Sony actually licensed every single song you hear in the film, and they're controlling the official soundtrack. They have a $500 million reasons to make sure this movie functions as a flawless commercial for his music. The sudden movie ending was a forced corporate fix. To protect their billion-dollar brand, the estate paid $15 million out of pocket to fund massive reshoots. They completely scrubbed the third act of the movie. They literally bought their way out of telling the truth. When you put all of the pieces together, the reality of this movie becomes completely obvious. The Michael Jackson biopic is a calculated corporate rebrand designed to protect a massive financial investment. The studio softened this traumatic childhood to make the narrative digestible for the general public. They spend $15 million in reshoots to legally scrub his biggest controversies right off the screen. Sony Music and the estate are working together to make sure the brand remains family-friendly and highly profitable. The ultimate tragedy here is that Michael Jackson spent the last years of his life fighting against this exact kind of industry control. He warned the public about the labels and refused to hand over his power to the executives. Now those same corporate entities own his history. They are the ones writing his legacy. They turned his life into a massive commercial to secure their billion-dollar catalog.